Will AI take your job as a PA or NP, and what do you need to do about it? AI is disrupting all sorts of industries, and the projections for job displacements range from 85 million jobs to 800 million jobs by 2030. So there's no doubt medicine as an industry will be affected, right? And there's lots of articles out there about the ways AI is changing, for example, radiology already. The question is, as a PA or NP, will it affect you? And if so, what do you need to do to be prepared? The first thing to do is recognize what % of your job has automatable hours, which is the key way that right now we're predicting what jobs will be easily displaced by AI versus not. Based on the percentage of automatable hours, some fields like radiology or pathology have been predicted to be disrupted more easily. For example, general practitioners are projected, according to McKinsey studies, to have somewhere near 12% of automatable hours, where other types of practitioners, like chiropractors, for example, have 2% of automatable hours. That means by this standard, a general clinician or general practitioner would be far more likely to be displaced by AI than a chiropractor. So by using this type of approach, it seems unlikely that PAs or NPs will be completely displaced by AI because our jobs actually have a low percentage of automatable hours. There's not a lot of specific data on our professions, but some data sets suggest that the likelihood of us being completely displaced is actually somewhere sub 15% over the next 2 decades, which is reassuring. However, AI will completely change the landscape of medicine, and those clinicians who are utilizing AI to increase efficiency will ultimately earn more compensation in most models that are based on revenue generation. If you look already, there's many tools available to us in the world of medicine that are AI generated or AI based in order for us to increase our diagnostic accuracy and our efficiency. Tools like Google's DeepMind, MedPalm, Isabel Pro, and Echo MD are all AI-based platforms that allow you to improve your diagnostic accuracy as well as broaden your own differential diagnoses. So in theory, right, clinicians utilizing those would potentially be faster, would maybe even be more accurate, better diagnosticians. Of course, I'm not suggesting any of those things would replace your clinical judgment, but when you augment your clinical judgment with these tools, you might be able to get there faster. One way in particular that AI has really changed the landscape of medicine is in the realm of documentation. And in fact, PAs who use AI in their documentation report 50% approximately increase in efficiency in their documentation. If you practice medicine in this decade, you know the documentation takes half your time. And so the idea that you could increase the efficiency of your documentation by 50% would inherently put you at the top tier of clinicians in terms of efficiency without creating any change to your actual patient care, right? There's no change at all to your interaction with the patient. All you're doing is doubling your efficiency with documentation, which will allow you to spend that much more time with patients or to see that many more patients. This has probably already created the plug for you of, okay, if I want to be someone on the front lines of using AI to improve myself professionally, I'm going to have to figure out how to utilize these tools in practice to increase my efficiency and potentially increase my diagnostic abilities. Those tools, people that are using them to create increased efficiency, are going to be people who can negotiate rev share models and make way more money than the clinicians who are not. Right? That's just the nature of the beast. So that's one way that you can position yourself to be a high earner. The other thing to think about is when you're choosing your subspecialty, what percentage of automatable hours would be present? We've already mentioned that things that require physical stuff, like physical procedures, you actually being in the OR, things like that, as of now, are less likely to be disrupted by AI. In addition, actually, there's some data, and CBI has some interesting articles about the likelihood of AI taking over psychiatric fields being lower because of by its nature being like empathy based. AI is less well suited to that. And so as you're thinking, like, if I want to be highly marketable as a PA or NP, and I want to reduce the likelihood of AI disrupting my job, maybe I'm going to look at a position that has a low percent of automatable hours, like a surgical subspecialty, like critical care, for example, that has a heavy procedural aspect, or even a psychiatric position. And then if I'm not in one of those fields, again, maybe I'm going to utilize AI to put myself at the forefront of efficiency and then negotiate for a compensation structure that rewards efficiency. Now, whether or not your job gets disrupted by AI, in a lot of ways is out of your control. But the idea that you've ever had job security is in general a lie, right? For all of us, whether the disruption is AI or COVID or whatever happens, you actually don't have a lot of job security just because you have a W-2 job. And there are certain things you can do to mitigate that financial risk for yourself so that when the AI comes or the pandemic comes or whatever happens, you're well positioned. The first, obvious, is to have cash reserves. It's obvious, but none of us do it, right? Everybody should have 3 to 6 months of expenses in an emergency fund, right? So if you have a really stable job and a low likelihood of an AI disrupt or whatever that looks like, maybe 3 months. If you have a position that is highly volatile, maybe you're in locums, maybe you're in pharmaceutical sales, something like that, 6 months might be more appropriate. So first, cash reserves. Second, mind your gap, as I call it, the gap between your income and expenses. Every single medical professional should be investing at least 20% of their income if you ever want to retire, AI aside. So you should have a gap already, that 20%. But the bigger that gap is, the more likely you are to have the ability to withstand a storm. And so if, everyone gets a pay cut because whenever they decide to offload 20% of your job to AI, then you can withstand that, right? If you have a gap, if you spend 65% of your income, you invest the remainder, you have a gap that allows you the wiggle room to get through hard economic times and navigate changes in income. The third thing is to create income diversification. This is actually pretty easy to do, but it's really overlooked. You can do it actually using your clinical skills in non-clinical ways. There's a lot of side hustles, so to speak, for medical professionals utilizing clinical knowledge outside of, let me pick up a shift. Things like doing expert witness work, finding a job speaking for a pharmaceutical company or a medical device, doing some type of medical writing. You can do consulting, again, for pharmaceutical companies, for example, creating the patient education documents, brochures, etc. All sorts of things are available to clinicians with clinical skills that will create income diversification. Why does that help protect you in a shifting landscape of AI, for example? Well, for one thing, if you have those cash reserves, you have the gap in your expenses and in your income, and then 30% of your gross household income comes from these extraneous sources. Now, all of a sudden, if your main job goes completely away, your ability to navigate that is tremendously different than your colleague across the hall who has no cash reserves, no other sources of income, and spends 90% of what they earn. Because your expenses are relatively low, you have some cushion in the bank, but in addition to that, 30% of your income comes from these alternative sources. And so the job loss for you doesn't mean an income of zero, it means an income reduction. Okay, those are the keys that you can utilize to protect yourself and create a moat around you, so to speak, so that you are professionally insulated from these shifting landscapes. This is good practice in all time frames, but I think in this time frame, it's more important than ever. The cool thing is a lot of these side hustles are actually really great CV builders and really great networking opportunities. So if you decide, hey, after 15 years of clinical practice in GI, for example, I'm burnt out, I'm done, I don't want to do clinical medicine anymore, you can transition pretty easily to an MSL position for an IBD drug for a pharmaceutical company. And if you've had 6 years experience speaking for them, you're going to be a front runner for that MSL position because your CV says, hey, I was groomed for this, right? I have the experience, I have the networking, I'm really well positioned. If you are the person who says, hey, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to go home, I'm going to do nothing else, then it becomes difficult for you to make those big career segues into these other non-clinical roles. Same thing goes like, a great example is academic. Maybe you've been an excellent clinician for 10 years and you decide, hey, I'd like to transition to full-time academia. But you've actually taught a few credit hours every other year for the last 10 years on the side. You've made extra money. You've bolstered your non-clinical use of clinical skills, right? And then when you want to make that career transition, you're very well suited for the position and again, a front runner candidate. That gives you next level protection, right? If AI takes your clinical job somehow, you're just like ready to roll to move in to utilizing your skill set in a completely different way for another high paying position, right? That will still give you stability, freedom, flexibility, all those things, and use the skills that you worked so hard and spent so much money to garner. So if you're someone who's worried about whether or not, AI is going to change the landscape, what it's going to do to medicine, how it's going to disrupt things, I'm right there with you, wondering, watching, ready to kind of ride the wave, but also don't hesitate to get these things in line to position yourself to be financially and professionally ready to roll, right? Emergency reserves, mind the gap, income diversification, and bolster that CV so that when you need the career transition, you're ready to go. If you want to figure out how are people doing this stuff? How do I network my way into some of these side hustles? Join the Millionaires in Medicine Club. It's totally free. You can go below, click the link, get access. But there's 5,000 medical professionals in there talking about this stuff. Professional development, money, how you get these side hustles, how you network. And so join the club, get the free advice, and make sure that you're positioned to kill it professionally and financially in these kind of shifting times that we're in.